on World News Tonight this Saturday. Secretary of State Colin Powell now will meet with Yasser Arafat after Arafat's statement today condemning terrorism. In the West Bank, the Israeli army seizes 6 more villages and a first look inside the rubble of the refugee camp at Jenin. In Florida, the former vice president rejoins the political debate, turning up the heat on domestic issues. The little airline that could cleans up on Wall Street.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight, Saturday.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Simpson. Secretary of State Colin Powell says he will meet with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat tomorrow in Ramallah. The decision came after Arafat issued a written statement in Arabic condemning terrorism. That bit of progress came as the Israeli army pushed ahead with its offensive. We have 2 reports tonight from the Middle East. First, the diplomatic efforts with ABC's Martha Raddatz, who is in Jerusalem. Martha.
Carol, the Palestinians were defiant in their statements yesterday, but today they said exactly what the State Department needed to hear. This afternoon, Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian leadership released a statement in Arabic, which was broadcast on Palestinian TV, saying, "We strongly condemn the violent operations that target Israeli civilians, especially the recent operation in Jerusalem." The statement also reaffirmed the Palestinian commitment to a negotiated peace, one of many positive elements, said State Department spokesman Richard Boucher.
The Secretary will work with Chairman Arafat and the Palestinian leadership to show leadership and to help make these statements a reality with effective action to bring an end to terror and violence and an early resumption of the political process.
The meeting was postponed after Friday's suicide bombing in Jerusalem. Since then, U.S. officials have been pressuring the Palestinians to condemn the attack in order for the meetings to be rescheduled. Yesterday, the Palestinians refused to speak out against the suicide attack until the U.S. condemned Israel's actions in Jenin, where Palestinians say hundreds of civilians have been killed. Today, after meeting with aid workers and religious leaders about the situation in the Palestinian territories, Secretary Powell did issue a statement saying, "We call upon Israel to respect international humanitarian principles. In this regard, we are particularly concerned at the humanitarian situation in Jenin." Tomorrow's meeting will be a triumph for Yasser Arafat. The image of the U.S. Secretary of State entering a bombed-out compound under siege by Israeli forces for more than 2 weeks will leave a powerful impression. The meeting will take place in the morning, and as you can imagine, Carol, it will be held under extraordinary security arrangements.
Martha, what has been the Israeli reaction to Chairman Arafat's statement?
Not good, Carol. They basically dismissed the statement, saying that Yasser Arafat's political organization was responsible for yesterday's suicide bombing.
Thank you very much. ABC's Martha Raddatz with Secretary Powell in Jerusalem. In the West Bank today, the Israeli army expanded its offensive. In recent days, troops have encountered heavy resistance in refugee camps in Nablus and Jenin. Today, the army entered at least 6 more Palestinian villages and towns nearby. ABC's Gillian Findley has more from Jerusalem. And we caution you that some of the images in this report are disturbing.
The small band of journalists sneaked into the camp, the first independent observers, and this is what they saw. Blocks of buildings reduced to rubble, residents apparently still in shock, and bodies. Civilians, fighters, it was impossible to know. The journalists only made it to one part of the camp and stayed only a few minutes. This woman told them the Israelis hit her house with missiles. In other places, the damage was clearly the work of bulldozers trying to widen narrow alleyways. They destroyed everything, this woman said. Everything. The Palestinians have accused Israel of carrying out a massacre here. The army, which lost 23 soldiers in the fighting, doesn't deny many innocent people died, but it blames Palestinian fighters who it says booby-trapped many of the buildings.
Many of the civilians were killed not because we deliberately, of course, and not even accidentally we killed them, but simply because they were in a place which was full with explosives.
Israel still refuses to let anyone into the camp. Peace demonstrators bearing food were turned away today. So again were international aid agencies, despite Secretary Powell's direct appeal to Israel. Israelis today were consumed with their latest tragedy. Yesterday's suicide attack that left 6 dead, more than 80 injured. This is the young Palestinian woman who carried the bomb. I want to turn my body into a barrel of TNT that will burn the enemy, she said. Today, the militant group Hamas promised the attacks will continue. It's still not clear how many Palestinians have died in Israel's incursions. The damage in many places is devastating. But in Nablus, what Palestinians are calling a miracle. For 4 days, Shamsa Shubi was buried in the rubble. Yesterday, rescue teams found her husband and then found her. The children, she cried. Where are the children? They were at the hospital morgue, 8 of them, children and grandchildren, the youngest just 4 years old. And also tonight, Carol, in Bethlehem, the standoff at the Church of the Nativity continues. A Palestinian police officer was killed there tonight. The Palestinians are blaming Israel's army, but the circumstances are far from clear. Carol?
Thank you very much, Gillian. ABC's Gillian Findlay reporting from Jerusalem. Our overseas briefing begins with thousands of demonstrators in London. They marched from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square, protesting the Israeli offensive in the West Bank, but remaining peaceful. That was not the case in Venezuela's capital, where hundreds of protesters clashed with police. The military's removal of leftist President Hugo Chavez from office this week has led to widespread protests. Today, the new transition government was forced to postpone the inauguration of its new cabinet. In Afghanistan today, there was another attack on international peacekeepers. A group of 30 gunmen fired assault rifles at British troops who were patrolling Kabul. No one was injured. 7 of the alleged attackers were later arrested.